The silence in the Kruger estate had a weight to it, a physical presence that absorbed sound and smothered light. It was the kind of quiet that cost millions, built from thick stone walls, triple-pane glass, and the unspoken fear of its staff. My job as a cleaner was to move through that silence without disturbing it, to be a ghost in a navy blue dress and a starched white apron, erasing smudges from marble and dust from priceless antiques, leaving no trace of myself behind. My daughter, Lena, was the only part of my life that refused to be silent. At 10, she was a sunbeam in a house of shadows, a splash of color against a pranker, monochrome world. Most days she stayed in our small suite in the staff wing, a world away from the cold heart of the estate. But sometimes her curiosity got the better of her. Today it had led her to the one place I'd forbidden her from going. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the professional calm I wore like a uniform. I'd been polishing the grand staircase, the scent of beeswax sharp in my nostrils, when I realized the low hum of her tablet had gone quiet 20 minutes ago. Her room was empty. The staff kitchen was empty. A frantic search of the west wing yielded nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the house's oppressive hush. There was only one other place, the memorial garden, Herr Kruger's private sanctuary, the place no one went. I slipped out a side door, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the slate path. The late afternoon sun filtered through the perfectly manicured linden trees, casting long, somber shadows. And there, at the center of the garden, was a small, exquisitely carved block of white marble, a child's grave. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the immaculate grass in front of it, her back to me. Her small shoulders were straight, her head bowed as if in prayer. She was talking in a low, earnest whisper, the way she talked to her dolls. My relief was so profound it almost buckled my knees, but it was immediately replaced by a fresh wave of terror. Because she was not alone. He stood under the shade of a ginkgo tree, a statue carved from shadow and grief. Victor Kruger, my employer, the most feared man in Berlin's underworld. I'd only ever seen him in passing. A blur of bespoke charcoal suits, and an aura of absolute, lethal control. He moved like the world owed him space. And the world always paid its debt. He hadn't seen me. His entire focus was on my daughter. His stillness was predatory, the coiled energy of a leopard watching its prey. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Every survival instinct screamed at me to grab Lena and run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. To make a sound would be to announce my crumbs and failure, my trespass. Lena finished her quiet monologue and patted the grass beside her. He misses you a lot, she said to the stone, her voice carrying in the still air. Mommy says it's okay to miss people. It just means you love them good. I saw Herr Kruger's shoulder tense, a barely perceptible tightening of the expensive fabric. He took a single, silent step out of the shadows. The sunlight caught the severe line of his jaw, the dark, unreadable depths of his eyes. He wasn't looking at the grave anymore. He was looking at Lena. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the mistake that would cost me everything. My job, our home, our safety. Lena must have sensed him. She turned, her bright, curious eyes landing on the replete, towering figure. She didn't show any fear. Children have an unnerving ability to see past the armor adults build. She saw a man standing alone by his son's grave. She scrambled to her feet, brushing grass from her leggings. She looked from the stone to the man, her expression one of profound, childlike logic. I held my breath, praying for her to be silent, to just come to me, but Lena never did the expected thing. She took a few steps toward him, tilting her head. The silence stretched, thin and fragile. I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. Then she spoke, her voice clear and innocent, shattering the prodop, sacred quiet of the garden. You're Leo's daddy, right? Herr Kruger didn't answer. He just watched her, his face an impenetrable mask. Lena took another step closer, undeterred. She gestured with a small hand back, toward her own chest. I don't have one. Daddy, I mean. And then she delivered the words that stopped the world from turning. The words lozenged, that sealed our fate. Since your little boy is in heaven, she asked with the devastating sincerity only a child could possess. Can you be my daddy instead? He froze. It wasn't a figure of speech. For a full 10 seconds, Victor Kruger, a man who moved with the deliberate grace of a predator, became utterly and completely still. His eyes, fixed on my daughter, held an expression I couldn't decipher. It was more than shock. It was something broken, something that had been struck a mortal blow. That was when he finally saw me lurking by the door. His gaze shifted, and his eyes locked with mine across the manicured lawn. The mask slammed back into place. But I had seen the crack. I had seen the man inside the monster. His eyes were not cold. They were hollowed out by loss. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply said my name, and the price is examined. Sound of it from his lips was a verdict. Anja. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. And I knew with a certainty that chilled to me to the bone that we were not just being fired. We were being claimed. I thought he would throw us out. I spent that night packing our few belongings into 2 suitcases, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fold Lena's clothes. I rehearsed my apologies, my pleas. I had failed to control my daughter, failed to respect the boundaries of his grief. I deserved to be dismissed. The summons came not in the form of a security guard, but a knock on my door at Daschen, 7 in the morning. It was Frau Schmidt, the head housekeeper, her face grim. Herr Kruger wishes to see you in his study. She paused, her eyes flicking to a sleeping Lena. He has instructed that you and the child be moved to the guest suite in the East Wing. Immediately, the words didn't compute. The East Wing wasn't for staff. It was for family, for honored guests. It was inside the fortress, past the layers of security that separated his world from mine. Moved? I whispered, my throat dry. Your things will be collected. Just come with me. Herr Kruger's study was a cage of dark oak and black leather. The air smelled of old books, cedar, and something metallic, like polished steel. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the garden where we'd been the day before. He didn't turn when I entered. She is not to go there again, he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of emotion. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry, sir. It will never happen again. I should have watched her more closely. It was not a request. He turned, and his eyes pinned me in place. It was a command. Her safety is now a matter of concern. The world outside these walls is complicated. The men who took my son from me still exist. That was the moment the floor dropped out from under me. This wasn't about a breach of protocol. This was about something else entirely. He was connecting Lena's innocent question to the violent reality of his life. Sir, with all due respect, my daughter and I have nothing to do with your business. A flicker of something amusement. Pity crossed his face. Yesterday, that was true. But she was seen with me at his grave. To my enemies, perception is reality. A new child in my orbit is a new weakness, a new target. The blood drained from my face. What are you saying? I am saying, he stated, moving to his desk and sitting in the enormous leather chair that looked more like a throne, that until I have neutralized the threat, you and Lena will remain here in the main house, under my protection. You will continue your duties, but you will not leave the grounds. Is that understood? It was a prison sentence delivered as a kindness, a gilded cage locked from the prison sentence. Outside, I had no choice. To refuse would be to walk out into a danger I couldn't see, a war I didn't understand. Here, at least, the monster was the one I knew. Yes, sir, I managed to say. Life changed. We moved into a suite, larger than our old apartment. It had silk, sheets and a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. Lena was ecstatic. She thought it was a grand adventure. I knew it was an incarceration. I saw more of him. He worked from his study, but he began taking his meals in a small dining room rather than alone. He would watch as Lena chattered away, her stories about school and cartoons filling the oppressive silence of the house. He never said much, but he listened. He observed. One evening, Lena was drawing at the table, her crayons spread out across the polished wood. I was clearing the dishes when she held up her masterpiece. It was a stick figure drawing of 3 people under a lopsided sun. A tall man, a woman with curly hair, and a little girl holding both their hands. "This is us," she announced proudly. I froze, a stack of plates in my hand. Herr Kruger looked at the drawing. His long, elegant fingers reached out and gently touched the paper. He traced the line of the man's figure. His face was unreadable, but his hand trembled just for a second. He looked at me over Lena's head, and for the first time his eyes weren't hollow. They were filled with a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to name. He was the most dangerous man I had ever met, a king in an empire of violence and fear. But in that moment, he just looked like a man staring at a ghost, the ghost of a life he'd lost, and the impossible picture of one he could never have. He was beginning to see her not as a liability, but as something else, something more, and that was far more dangerous than any rival syndicate. He started leaving small things for her. A beautifully illustrated book of Grimm's fairy tales left on her nightstand, a box of expensive Swiss chocolates by her plate at breakfast. He never presented them to her directly. They just appeared, like offerings left at a shrine. One afternoon, I found him in the library, a room I was meant to be dusting. He was holding a small, worn leather soccer ball. It was scuffed and faded, clearly, well-loved. He turned it over and over in his hands, his expression distant. "Leo loved soccer," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't look at me. He wanted to play for the national team. He was fast. It was the first time he had volunteered a piece of his past, a piece of his pain. The wound he carried was always there, just beneath the surface of the tailored suits and the cold demeanor. His son was his ghost, the failure he could never outrun. He had all the power in the world, and he couldn't protect the one person who mattered. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. He finally looked at me, his gaze intense. "Do not be sorry for me, Anja. Pity is a weakness I cannot afford." He set the ball down on a shelf, placing it with the care of a holy relic. "Just keep your daughter safe." The danger he spoke of became real a week later. I was given permission to take Lena to a dental appointment, a rare trip outside the compound walls. We were flanked by 2 black sedans, one in front of our car, one behind. It felt like a presidential motorcade. On the way back, a dark van swerved aggressively, cutting off the lead car. Our driver swore under his breath, his hands tightening on the wheel. The van slammed on its brakes. Men in black masks spilled out, brandishing pipes and knives. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed Lena, shoving her down onto the floor of the car and covering her body with my own. "Close your eyes, baby. Don't. Look." The world outside the car erupted into chaos. The sounds were sickening. The crunch of metal, guttural shouts, the wet thud of blows landing. My driver was out of the car, joining the guards from the other vehicles. Through it all, I kept my body pressed over Lena's, whispering reassurances I didn't feel. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The silence that fell was more terrifying than the noise had been. One of the guards, a man named Rolf, opened my door. His face was bruised, his knuckles bloody. "It's okay, miss. They're gone." When we returned to the estate, Victor Kruger was waiting for us at the entrance. He didn't rage. He didn't yell. His stillness was more frightening than any explosion of temper. His eyes swept over me, then over Lena, who was clinging to my leg, her face pale. When he was certain we were unharmed, his gaze hardened, turning to ice. "Rolf," he said, his voice lethally soft. "Give me a name." "The Adler family, sir." It was a message. Kruger's jaw tightened. "They have made a grave error." He looked at me, and his eyes held a possessive fire I had never seen before. They threatened what is mine. That night, I had a chance to leave. While the entire security staff was on high, alert dealing with the aftermath of the attack, a service gate was left less guarded than usual. I could have taken Lena and slipped out into the night, disappeared into the city. A part of me screamed to do it, to run back to a life of anonymity and safety. But I thought of the men in masks. I thought of Victor Kruger's promise of protection, a promise backed by the terrifying efficiency I had just witnessed. Out there we were prey. In here, we were under the guardianship of the apex predator. I unpacked the small go bag I had kept ready since we moved. I made a deliberate choice. I chose the cage. I chose to stay. Later, unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He was there, standing in the dark, looking out the window into the night. He wore a simple black t-shirt and gray trousers, the first time I'd ever seen him without the armor of a suit. A fresh bandage was wrapped around his left forearm. He turned as I entered, and we stood in silence for a long moment. The air was thick with unspoken things. "You should have taken the opportunity," he said, his voice a low murmur. Rolf reported the gate was unsecured for 17 minutes. "A woman as smart as you would have noticed. Lena is safer here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you?" he asked, taking a step closer. The space between us crackled with an amarkand, a tension that had nothing to do with bodyguards and rival families. "Are you safer with me?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. He was so close now I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the clean scent of soap and the faint, lingering note of cedar. He lifted his uninjured hand, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to touch me. Instead, his fingers hovered an inch from my cheek, close enough for me to feel their warmth. "My son's mother," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "She hated this life. She was afraid of me, and she was right to be." His eyes searched mine, looking for something. "You are not afraid. Not in the same way." "Why?" I met his gaze, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I'm terrified every single minute of the day," I confessed. "But I've been alone and scared my whole life. This is just a different kind of monster under the bed." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a sad, bitter thing. "And what if the clink monster is not under the bed? What if he is standing right in front of you?" He let his hand drop. The moment was broken, but something had shifted between us. He had shown me his vulnerability, and I had shown him my resolve. We were no longer just a boss and his maid. We were two people trapped in the same gilded cage, beginning to see each other in the dark. The war with the Adler family escalated. It was a quiet, brutal affair, fought in the shadows of the city. I saw the evidence in the grim faces of Kruger's men, the increased security patrols, the way he spent hours locked in his study, his voice a low, dangerous murmur on the phone. One evening, I overheard two guards talking in hushed tones. They spoke of a raid on a warehouse, of retribution that was surgical and absolute. I found a discarded newspaper the next day. A small article on page 6 mentioned a gas leak explosion at a facility owned by Adler Logistics. 10 men were dead. The police suspected no foul play. I felt sick. This was the reality of Victor Kruger's protection. It was a shield, forged in the fire of other people's blood. The knowledge should have made me run. It should have sent me screaming for the nearest exit. Instead, I found myself looking at him with a new, terrifying understanding. He was a monster, yes, but he was our monster. The Adlers, bleeding from their losses, grew desperate, and desperation made them stupid. They decided to hit him where he was most vulnerable. The call came from Lena's school. I was cleaning the upstairs gallery when my phone buzzed. It was the school nurse, her voice tight with panic. "Anja, there was an incident. A man tried to approach Lena during recess. Security stopped him, but he had a knife. The police are here. You need to come now." The world tilted on its axis. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Before I could even process the words, Kruger was there. He must have an instinct for a crisis. He took the phone from my trembling hand. "This is Victor Kruger," he said, his voice dropping to a register of pure command. "Lock down the school. No one enters or leaves. My men will be there in 5 minutes. Is the child secure?" He listened for a moment. "Good." He hung up and looked at me. My legs had given out, and I was leaning against the wall for support. "She's safe," he said, his voice firm, grounding. "They didn't get to her." He led me to the car, his hand a firm, inescapable pressure on the small of my back. The ride to the school was a blur of sirens and screeching tires. His men, a dozen of them in 3 cars, descended on the school like a special forces team, efficient and terrifying. We found Lena in the principal's office, sitting on a chair, clutching a teddy bear one of the teachers had given her. She looked small and pale. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears and ran into my arms. I held her, rocking her, my own tears streaming down my face. Over her head, I saw Kruger talking to the police captain. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were black with a rage so cold it was arctic. He wasn't just angry. He was promising annihilation. That night, after a doctor had checked Lena over, and she had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep in her bed, I found myself pacing in my suite. I had crossed a line. My daughter, my innocent child, was now a pawn in a mafia war. This was my fault. I had stayed. I had chosen the cage. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Victor. He held 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive whiskey. "She is asleep?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. He poured a generous amount into 1 glass and handed it to me. "Drink." I took it and swallowed. The burn a welcome distraction from the cold knot of fear in my stomach. We stood in silence. The house was quieter than ever, as if holding its breath. "This is my fault," I whispered, the guilt clawing at my throat. "I should have left when I had the chance." "No," he said, his voice absolute. "This is my fault. I brought the storm to your door." I saw a light in my darkness. He looked towards Lena's room, and I was too selfish to let it go. It was the closest he had ever come to a confession. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous, more honest. It was an admission of possession, an admission of weakness. "I told myself keeping you here was for your own protection," he continued, his gaze locking with mine. "I was lying to myself. I kept you here for me." He reached out, and this time he did touch me. His fingers brushed a stray curl from my forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. "They will not get another chance," he vowed. "I will burn their entire world to the ground. I will erase the name Adler from every book in the city. I will do it for my son's memory. And I will do it for her." He paused, his thumb stroking my temple. "And for you." The final confrontation was not something I witnessed. It happened far from the pristine walls of the estate. Victor was gone for 2 days. The house was on lockdown, silent and tense. His right-hand man informed me that Mr. Adler and his sons had been in a tragic accident on a family yacht. There were no survivors. The war was over. When Victor returned, he looked weary. He carried the weight of his victory in the slump of his shoulders, in the new lines etched around his eyes. He found me, in the garden, the one place I had avoided for months. I was watching Lena chase a butterfly, her laughter the only sound in the somber quiet. He came to stand beside me, his presence a familiar comfort now rather than a threat. "It's finished," he said. "I know." We watched Lena for a long time. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. "This world," he said, gesturing to the house, the guards, the life he led, "it is not a kind one. It is not safe. It will never be the life a normal woman would choose." "I haven't been a normal woman for a very long time," I replied, my eyes still on my daughter. "Normal women don't make bargains with monsters to keep their children safe." He turned to face me fully. He took my hands in his. They were large and warm, the hands of a killer, and a protector. I am asking you to do more than bargain, Anja. I am asking you to stay. Not as my employee, not as my ward. He took a breath, the word seeming to cost him something. As my wife, I want to give Lena my name, to protect her not as a liability, but as my daughter. To protect you as the woman who stands beside me. It wasn't a proposal born of romance. It was a treaty, a cementing of an oh no, alliance forged in fear and necessity that had somehow, impossibly, bloomed into something more. It was a promise of a fortress, a vow of absolute loyalty that, in his world, was more valuable than love. I looked from his dark, earnest eyes to my daughter, who was now trying to show her drawing of a butterfly to one of the stone-faced guards. The guard wasn't smiling, but the corner of his eye was crinkling. This house of shadows was her home now. This dangerous man was her protector. I had made my choice long ago, the night I decided not to run. This was just giving it a name. Yes, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the weight of an oath. He did not kiss me. He simply brought my hand to his lips and pressed them against my knuckles, a gesture of fealty, of claiming a cost had been paid. My old life was gone forever. His solitude was forfeit. But what we were building, in its place, felt real, solid. Later that evening, I walked past the open door of the library. Inside, a single lamp cast a warm glow. Victor was sitting in one of the large armchairs. Lena was curled up on his lap, fast asleep, her head resting on his chest. He had a book open in one hand, but he wasn't reading. He was just watching her, one hand resting gently on her back. Rising and falling with her steady breaths, he looked up and saw me in the doorway. A silent understanding passed between us. He was still Victor Kruger, the ruler of a dark empire. The world outside was still dangerous. But in here, in the quiet heart of the fortress, this man, who had lost a son, was slowly, carefully learning to be a father. And I, the woman who had only ever known how to survive, was learning how to build a home. He was a king, and she was his princess. And I somehow had become his queen.